The floor was cold. That was the first thing I noticed, not the pain, not the sound of her laughter, not even my son's face when he looked down at me and turned away. Just the cold tiles pressing against my cheek and the faint smell of the cedar wood they'd refinished 3 years ago. Wood I had paid for, a floor I had chosen, a house I had built with my own 2 hands, not literally, but close enough. Nobody helped me up. I heard the clink of glasses from the dining room, the low murmur of conversation resuming like nothing had happened. My son's wife said something about dessert. Someone laughed at a joke I didn't hear. And I lay there, 63 years old, with a bruised shoulder and a cracked sense of something I used to call family, listening to the dinner party continue without me. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I am not a man who asks for much. I never have been. I spent 31 years building a logistics company from a second-hand truck and a cell phone with a cracked screen, and in all that time, the only thing I ever truly wanted was for my son to be proud of me. Just that. Nothing complicated. His name is Derek. He is 38 years old. He has his mother's eyes. She passed 11 years ago, and every time I look at him I still see her, which is probably why I let things go as long as I did. His wife is named Courtney. I will let you form your own opinion of Courtney as this story moves forward. They married 6 years ago at a vineyard in Napa that cost more money than I care to say out loud. I paid for most of it. Not because they asked directly, Courtney was smarter than that, but because Derek came to me one Sunday afternoon looking the way he always looked when money was involved, and he said, "Dad, we're a little short," and I wrote the check because I was his father, and that's what fathers do. That's what I told myself anyway. That's what I kept telling myself for 6 years. I paid for their down payment. I covered the gap when Derek's marketing consulting work dried up during the slow seasons, which seemed to come 3 times a year. I paid for the private preschool for their daughter, my granddaughter, who goes by Lily, and who is 5 years old and has absolutely nothing to do with any of this, except that she is the reason I did not burn everything down when I finally understood the full picture. What they did not know, what I had been extremely careful to ensure they did not know, was the size of what I had built. See, I sold my logistics company 8 years ago. Not a small sale. The kind of sale that requires multiple lawyers, several weeks of due diligence, and a long conversation with a financial advisor about what to do with more money than you ever expected to have. I moved it quietly. I restructured everything through a holding company. On paper, I was a retired man living in a modest house in Asheville, North Carolina, collecting a modest pension from a transportation business I used to own. I drove a 2017 Ford F-150 with a small dent above the rear wheel well. I shopped at the same grocery store I'd shopped at for 20 years. I wore Carhartt jackets and drank black coffee, and nobody who looked at me would ever think the word wealthy. This was intentional. My wife, Derek's mother, Patricia, used to say that money made people strange. She grew up watching it happen in her own family, watching cousins turn into strangers over square footage and jewelry, and she made me promise early in our marriage that we would never let it do that to us. We kept that promise while she was alive. I tried to keep it after she was gone. But I suppose the truth is that I didn't hide my resources just to honor Patricia's memory. Part of me always understood, on some level I didn't want to look at directly, that Derek had married someone for whom money was the primary language. And I was afraid of what would happen if she ever learned how fluent I was. I had a financial advisor named Walter, who had been with me for 15 years and who knew everything. I had an estate attorney named Frances, sharp, patient, absolutely ruthless when the situation called for it, and she had been restructuring my will for the past 2 years, based on conversations I'd been having with her about my son's marriage. I want to be clear. I did not want this. None of it. I would have given anything for Derek to have chosen differently, for Courtney to have been a different person, for me to have been wrong about all of it. I wasn't wrong. The dinner party was a housewarming. They had moved to a larger home in Charlotte, a 5-bedroom colonial with a finished basement and a 3-car garage. Derek had called it a good investment. What he meant was that he needed $94,000 for the down payment, and he'd run out of ways to get it that didn't involve asking me directly, so Courtney had called me instead, 2 weeks before closing, her voice warm and practiced, talking about equity and neighborhood schools and how much Lily would love having a real backyard. I wrote the check. I didn't ask questions. At the party, there were 12 people I had never met. Friends of Courtney's from her junior league chapter, her college sorority sisters, her husband's golf partners, and their glossy wives. I sat at one end of the table in my Carhartt jacket and I drank water because I don't drink wine, and I ate the catered food and I smiled at people who looked through me like I was a window. Courtney introduced me to her friends twice that evening. Both times, she called me Derek's dad, not my father-in-law, not by my name, Derek's dad. The way you'd refer to someone who was present but not quite part of the picture. The third time she introduced me to a couple who had arrived late, she said, "And this is Frank. He used to drive trucks." She smiled when she said it, perfectly warm, perfectly dismissive, like she'd reached into my chest and rearranged something. Derek, standing 3 feet away, said nothing. I went to use the bathroom. It was down the hall, past the staircase that led to the upper floor. On my way back, I stopped at the top of those stairs because I could hear my name being spoken in the kitchen below, and what my mother once told me about listening at doors came into my head, and I chose not to follow her advice. Courtney's voice, low and precise. He's fine, Diane. He's just not exactly the kind of guest who elevates a room, you know? Derek is completely different from how he was raised. That's the whole point. A pause. Then, the house is the last thing we're going to need from him. Once the estate is settled, I didn't hear the rest because a door opened somewhere and the conversation shifted, but I stood very still for a moment at the top of the stairs and felt something in my chest go quiet in a way it had never gone quiet before. I went back to the table. I sat down. I ate the rest of my dinner with 11 strangers and my son, who would not meet my eyes, and his wife, who smiled at me with the specific warmth of someone performing warmth. And I thought about Patricia, and I thought about Lily in her preschool classroom, and I thought about a 31-year-old truck driver who had worked 18-hour days so that his son could have every single thing he needed. After dinner, Derek asked me to help carry some boxes from his car to the upstairs storage room. I was glad to be useful. We were on the landing at the top of the stairs, and I was holding a box of books against my chest, and I said, "She called me a truck driver tonight." Derek didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "She didn't mean anything by it." "I drove trucks for 4 years," I said. "Then I owned the trucks. Then I owned the company. Then I sold the company. That's not a story to be embarrassed by." He put down the box he was carrying. He turned toward me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before, impatient, almost contemptuous, and he said, "Dad, can you just not make everything about you tonight? This is our house. These are our friends. Can you just try to fit in for once?" I stood there for a moment. The box was heavy. My shoulder, which I'd had surgery on 2 years ago, was starting to ache. I said, "I have always been proud of you." He looked at me like that was the most irrelevant thing I could have said. Then Courtney appeared at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at us, and she said something sharp to Derek about the garage door, and Derek moved toward the stairs, and I took a single step forward because I thought he was going to walk past me without saying another word. And in the shifting and the stepping and the general confusion of the narrow landing, I lost my footing on the top step. I went down hard. The box of books went with me. I hit the 4th step with my bad shoulder, and then the 7th with my hip, and I came to rest at the bottom of the stairs in a heap, with my son's books scattered around me, and my face very close to the baseboard. For about 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Courtney made a sound. It took me a moment to identify it, because I wasn't expecting it. It was a laugh. Short, quickly suppressed. She covered it with her hand, but unmistakably, a laugh. And from the dining room, someone who had seen or half seen what happened called out, "Is everything okay?" And there was that sound again, that low collective murmur of people deciding to find something funny. Derek did not come down the stairs. He stood at the top and looked at me and said, "You okay?" I said I was fine. I got myself off the floor with nobody's help. My shoulder was on fire. I picked up 3 books and set them on the bottom step, and then I said goodnight to everyone in the dining room, and I got my jacket from the coat rack by the door, and I drove home to Asheville in my 2017 Ford F-150 with the dent above the rear wheel well. I did not call Derek. He did not call me. That night, I sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours with a bag of frozen peas on my shoulder and a yellow legal pad in front of me, and I wrote down everything I had given them, not from bitterness or maybe a little from bitterness, but because I needed to see it all in one place. The wedding, the first apartment deposit, the car loan I'd co-signed that they'd never mentioned repaying, the business loan Derek had taken to start his consulting practice, the preschool, the medical bills from when Lily was born early and they didn't have enough coverage, the down payments. I added it up. I did not recognize the number at first. Then I added it again to be sure. Then I called Frances. It was 11:15 at night. She answered on the second ring because Frances is that kind of attorney. I said, "I'd like to revisit the will." She said, "How soon?" I said, "How's your Tuesday?" Frances and I met for 4 hours that Tuesday. We went through everything. She had already prepared several alternative structures for me over the past year. She was not surprised by this conversation, which told me something about how long I had actually known, on some level, that this day was coming. We restructured the estate so that Derek would receive a monthly stipend enough to live on comfortably, not enough to stop working, not enough to do anything dramatic with. The bulk would go to a charitable trust that Patricia and I had discussed years ago, and to an irrevocable education trust for Lily that her parents could not access, touch, or in any way redirect. Frances added a provision that I thought was elegant. If Derek and Courtney divorced, the stipend would continue. If they remained married, it would be reviewed annually. This was not punishing Derek. This was protecting him, in the way that a father protects a son who cannot yet see what he's standing in. Then I made a second set of changes. The house, Derek and Courtney's house, the one with the 5 bedrooms and the finished basement, was mortgaged, and the mortgage was held by a private lending arrangement I had structured at the time of the sale. In practical terms, I was the bank. I had never mentioned this to Derek. He believed he had a conventional mortgage through a company called Meridian Capital Partners. What Meridian Capital Partners actually was a shell entity that Francis had incorporated and Walter managed. I called the note, not immediately. I gave Francis 6 weeks to ensure every legal mechanism was clean and properly filed. I gave Walter time to prepare the associated documentation, and during those 6 weeks, I did something else. I visited my granddaughter. I drove to Charlotte on a Wednesday afternoon when I knew Derek was out of town for work. I texted Courtney that I was in the area and would love to see Lily if that was all right. She said yes. I think she felt some obligation after the dinner. Or perhaps she was simply performing normalcy. I took Lily to the zoo, just the 2 of us. We looked at the giraffes for a very long time because she thought they were the funniest thing she had ever seen. She ate a hot dog and got mustard on her shirt and laughed about it. She held my hand in the reptile house because she was a little scared, but she didn't want to admit it. And that small hand in mine was the most important thing that had happened to me in years. On the drive back, she fell asleep in her car seat. I sat in the parking lot outside their house for a few minutes before I woke her, just watching her sleep, and I made a promise to Patricia, quietly, in the way I do when I need to tell her something. I promised that Lily would be all right. Whatever happened with Derek and Courtney, whatever the years brought, the education trust would be waiting for her. Francis had structured it so that it activated at 18 and could not be contested, redirected, or accessed by anyone other than Lily herself. It was, as Francis put it, airtight. The letter went out on a Thursday. It was addressed to Derek, not Courtney, because the mortgage was in Derek's name. It came from Francis's firm, and it was formal and precise, and it explained, in the dispassionate language of financial documents, that the loan was being called under the early termination clause that Derek had signed and, by the evidence of his initials on page 7, acknowledged. Derek called me that same afternoon. I want to describe the tone of that call to you accurately, because it matters. He did not start with anger. He started with confusion, genuine, unperformed confusion, and that confusion told me something important. He had not known. He had genuinely not known that I held the mortgage, which meant that Courtney had not told him, which meant that she had either not known or she had known and kept it from him. I suspected the latter. Dad, he said, what is this? What is Meridian Capital Partners? I said, it's me, Derek. The silence on the other end of the line lasted a long time. He said, you've held our mortgage this whole time? I said yes. He said, how long have you? Do you know what our interest rate? I said, your interest rate was the lowest rate I could structure without raising questions. I wasn't trying to profit from you. He was quiet again. Then he said, why didn't you tell me? And I thought about the landing at the top of those stairs. I thought about he used to drive trucks. I thought about standing at the bottom of my own son's staircase with nobody offering a hand. I said, I'm going to ask you something and I need you to answer me honestly. When I fell at the housewarming, did you think about coming down to help me? A long pause. He said, Dad. I said, that's all right. You don't have to answer. He said, she would have, and then he stopped. He said, I don't know what I would have done. I believed him. And I think that's the saddest part of this whole story, that my son told me he didn't know what he would have done, and I believed him, and I still loved him. I said, I'm not taking the house, Derek. I'm not going to put Lily out of her home. That was never what this was about. He exhaled. I said, but there are going to be some changes, and I need you to hear them before I tell you everything else. I told him about the estate restructuring. I told him about the stipend. I told him about the education trust for Lily. I did not tell him the total number. That was never the point, and it would only have made things worse. But I gave him enough to understand the shape of what I had built and what I had quietly been choosing to do with it. I heard him sit down somewhere, a chair scraping against a floor. He said, Courtney doesn't know any of this. I said, no. He said, she's going to. And he stopped again. I said, that's between you and your wife. I'm not trying to end your marriage. I'm trying to protect my granddaughter. You think she married me for... I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Derek was quiet for a very long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Younger somehow, stripped of something. He said, I watched you fall down those stairs and I didn't move. I didn't move, Dad. I said, I know. He said, I don't know how I got here. And I thought about that for a while before I answered. I thought about the 38 years I had known this person, from the night he was born in a hospital in Raleigh during a thunderstorm while I paced the waiting room in my work boots, to the little boy who followed me everywhere on Saturday mornings, to the teenager who told his friends his father worked in transportation, said it quietly, like it was something to be gotten past. I thought about the man he had tried to become: polished, ambitious, someone who attended vineyard weddings and lived in 5-bedroom colonials and had a wife who knew how to work a room. I thought about the fact that none of that was entirely Courtney's doing, That some of it was just Derek, trying to be someone Patricia and I hadn't raised him to be, and finding that it was easier to walk away from us in the process. I said, "You've got a daughter who thinks you hung the moon. That's still worth something. Don't waste it." 2 weeks later, Derek called me again. He said that he and Courtney had started seeing a couples counselor. He said it in the tone of a man reporting something factual, not asking for a reaction. I said I was glad. He asked if he could bring Lily to Asheville on the following Saturday. I said yes. Of course I said yes. Lily arrived in a pink raincoat, even though it wasn't raining. She said it was her favorite coat and weather was, in her words, not the boss of her. I took her to the botanical garden and let her run on the grass until her cheeks were red, and Derek sat on a bench beside me and we didn't say very much, and that was fine. We didn't need to say very much. There is an account at a regional bank in Charlotte that has Lily's name on it. She will not know about it until she is 18. It will cover 4 years at any university she chooses, plus living expenses, plus a little extra for whatever it is 18-year-olds need extra for. Nobody can touch it. Not Derek. Not Courtney. Not any lawyer either of them might hire on whatever future difficult day arrives. It belongs to her completely, and it will be there completely when she needs it. Frances calls that provision the lock. She says she put it in a structure that has no key except Lily's own signature, 18 years from now. I like that. The house is still in Derek's name. The mortgage is still technically held by Meridian Capital Partners, which means it is still held by me, which means I have chosen not to call it. That choice stands as long as certain things remain true, as long as Derek remains present in his daughter's life, as long as the counseling continues, as long as I am allowed to see my granddaughter without performance or agenda. These are not punishments. These are just the terms of how trust gets rebuilt. I am not naive about Courtney. I do not expect transformation. People are mostly what they are, and what Courtney is someone who calculated the angle of a room and placed people in it accordingly. And for a long time I was someone she had placed in the back corner where the lighting wasn't good. That won't change overnight. It might not change at all. But I noticed, at the most recent dinner, a quiet one, at a restaurant, no vineyard, no catered spread, that she introduced me to the couple at the next table by my full name. Not Derek's dad. Not he used to drive trucks. My name. It's a small thing. I'm not building anything on it. But I noticed. The thing I think about most, honestly, is not the money and not the house and not the letter Frances sent or the will or any of the machinery of consequence I spent those weeks assembling. I think about that night on the floor, the cold tiles, the smell of cedar, and I think about what I did while I was lying there, which was that I looked up at the ceiling at the crown molding I had paid for, and I thought, I have been here before. Not on this floor, not in this house, but in this place. The place where you're invisible to the people who are supposed to see you. I had been invisible as a young man trying to build something, driving routes that other people wouldn't take, calling clients who didn't want to talk to me, waking at 4 a.m. because there was always more to do. I had been invisible, and I had built something anyway, out of will and stubbornness and a deep, inconvenient love for a life I was trying to make worth living. Getting up off that floor was not the hardest thing I had done, not even close. I got up, I got my jacket, I drove home, and then I made some phone calls. My shoulder still hurts sometimes when the weather changes. Patricia used to say, I was a human barometer. I still smile when I remember her saying it. Lily starts kindergarten in the fall. She has already informed me, with great seriousness, that she is going to be a veterinarian who also does gymnastics. I told her that sounded like an excellent plan. She told me I could come watch her do gymnastics whenever I wanted, as long as I brought the fruit snacks because the ones her parents bought were the wrong kind. I drove to 3 different stores to find the right kind. They were in a yellow bag. She approved. Some things in this world are still very simple. A 5-year-old girl who holds your hand in the reptile house, not because she has to, but because she wants to. A Saturday afternoon in a botanical garden. A pink raincoat that doesn't care about the weather forecast. I built something, and I protected it, and now I am watching it grow in the form of a small person who laughs at giraffes. That is enough. That has always been enough. I just needed some people to understand that I knew that, and that there were consequences for forgetting it.